the future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Friday, January 13th. Yes, a Friday the 13th to start off our first Friday show of 2023, and the technological gremlins are already doing their dirty work. But hopefully, we got that straightened out for today. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can also help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And it looks like we're going to need it, but we cannot let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted pact to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Well, on today's show, bull-siderism prevails in D.C. as Merrick Garland appoints a special counsel to look into the confidential documents that turned up at Biden's old office space and garage. Are you ready for nonstop investigations from now until the presidential elections in 2024? Well, like it or not, that's what you get. That's what we get. And catastrophic weather continues. In California, at least 18 people, by some counts 19 people are dead, following climate change-charged atmospheric rivers that led to widespread flooding, mudslides, and power outages. The National Weather Service reports that Central California received more than half of its average yearly rainfall, or yearly precipitation, not just rainfall, yearly precipitation in just 2 weeks. In Alabama, we just saw a string of tornadoes rip through that state and others throughout the region. But in Alabama, at least 7 people were killed as those series of tornadoes and extreme weather rolled across the state. Meanwhile, researchers released findings from Exxon's internal documents that show that Exxon scientists were strikingly accurate in their climate change modeling as early as the 1970s. Yes, they knew. The researchers call the documents a smoking gun in that claim that Exxon knew the devastating consequences of burning fossil fuels, even as it invested heavily in climate change denial propaganda and became the most profitable corporation in the history of the world. It's just pretty crazy. It's just crazy. It's crazy. Meanwhile, NASA also released climate change data, which paints a really bleak picture of the consequences of Exxon's climate denial. Close to home here on Tuesday, the Central Bucks School Board approved Policy 321, which bans what they call advocacy activities. The policy takes aim at teachers' ability to display LGBTQ pride symbols and safe spaces stickers in the school. All under the auspice of we just want our kids to not be indoctrinated by non-racists. We don't want all this. We want our kids to be white supremacists and patriarchal misogynists, not caring whole democratic citizens. Sorry. And students at the Penridge School District say they feel erased after that district instituted similar ban earlier this year. Yep, that's where we are. It is going to be one heck of a school board election year, that's for sure. For more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get your streams. And check out his website at thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms, and get you subscribed to his podcast, wherever you get your podcast. And it's 2023. Yep, got to be listening to Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, that's no doubt. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind the podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And attention all you gamers out there, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids get discounts when they get A's in the report card. That's awesome. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn. That's with 2 N's. That's at The Game Inn. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. A special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, as always, who wrote our intro song, They're All People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page. Follow him on Twitter at SongADayman. That's at SongADayman on Twitter. Good morning, Emily. Good morning, Amy. Look, everybody, if you want a progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches homegrown progressive media today by becoming a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress and become a patron. We're here for the fight, but we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement and movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress today. And hey, look, we even got a way, like, you don't want to become a member, but you've got like $100 like burning a hole in your pocket. You can head on over to paypal.me/rcpress and drop us a one-time donation right there. We are building up, and hopefully, I have to say, thanks to all the people supporting this show, it looks like, I haven't had the time to actually hook all this stuff up yet, but we've got a new kind of podcast board, if you will. Right now, I'm working off a mixer and this whole other thing, but it's overly complicated. Let me put it like that. It's overly complicated. So hopefully, this is going to streamline some things and kind of defeat the technological gremlins that have been plaguing me for the past month or so. Thank you all that. But look, the bigger issue, the bigger news is that we're going to be expanding kind of what we're doing here at Raging Chicken, thanks to all the folks who are out supporting this show. If you know what I'm saying. Well, welcome to Friday the 13th, everybody. It feels like an appropriate beginning to the year, I guess, because I do think it's, we're in for a bit of a horror show this year. Especially when it comes down at the local level and local politics. I've been following what's been going on in the, in DC quite a bit. Well, actually, that's a lie. I have not been following what's been going on in DC quite a bit, but I have been paying attention. As soon as this story broke, that these confidential documents turned up in an old office space that Biden used kind of after he was vice president. Pretty much, the script was already written for what was going to happen, right? It was a gift to the cult of both siderisms that says both sides do the same thing, therefore they're all equally bad, therefore we don't need to make any kind of distinctions, and we don't need to basically hold evildoers, as the old President George W. Bush used to like to say, the evildoers of the Republican Party accountable. Why? Because, well, look, the Democrats do it too, so thus and therefore there's nothing we can do about it, right? That's the whole cult of both siderisms, right? It is the most anti-critical approach to how we think about the world, right? Is simply as a way of deflecting any kind of critical analysis by simply saying, yeah, but what about them? The whataboutism, the both siderisms, that both sides do it, right? And it doesn't allow us to make any kind of meaningful distinctions between the two. Just to take one as an example, right? What happened at Mar-a-Lago, right? When we found boxes and boxes of confidential and top secret documents were taken to Mar-a-Lago without the proper protocols, right? Then the Donald Trump and his lawyers denied that they had any of those documents. It required months and months of negotiations even to get in to search the premises. They finally handed it over and swore, right, on their mama's grave that that was all there was. And sure enough, turns out there were more. They lied about it, right? And then had to basically be extracted from their hands. And all through a kind of like a fit thrown by Donald Trump and everyone around him that this was kind of government overreach, right? That this was, you know, the Nazis coming, the Stasi reborn, right? All that kind of nonsense, right? Versus what happened here, right? That Joe Biden had confidential or top secret documents. According to the reporting that I've been reading so far, it's not quite clear the process by which those documents ended up where they are, right? So the question remains about were proper procedures followed, were these protocols observed, and all that kind of stuff. That'll I'm sure that's going to come out in the reporting. But what had happened is that there were these office spaces that were occupied by that kind of like the Biden Center or something like this, and it was kind of like his like think tank that allowed a space to kind of continue his political organization before he ran for president. It's basically how DC works, right? They set up these like quote unquote think tanks, and there were some of these documents that were there. They were in a closet. Apparently, they were locked, right? Kind of in that closet. And when people were going to clean stuff out, they came across this box, right, that had some documents in it, right? I believe the number was around 10 or something like this. And as soon as when they found that out, they reported it immediately to the National Archives, right, and disclosed it and gave it to them. And since then, the Biden's people and Joe Biden have been cooperating with the people that were there. That led to a kind of the second round of investigation to kind of look for these other spaces in Biden's home and this other stuff. And they also found that in subsequent days that in his garage, I guess, or garage of his vacation home or something, there was a locked room off to the side of that, kind of like an office space type of thing or storage space like this. And they found a couple additional documents there. Okay, that's the story, right? Now, in a sane, rational world, we would be able to distinguish between those two. We could say as a baseline, right, despite kind of like procedures and protocol regarding confidential and top secret documents, right, it appears that politicians, especially powerful politicians, might kind of be a little loosey-goosey with the kind of official protocols, right? Again, not quite sure what happened in the Biden stuff, but still, the very fact that those documents were in that office and out of his control or were unaware where they were, that's a problem, right? I mean, I think would all agree with that, right? So we know that as kind of the baseline. Then what happens in the normal functioning of government, right? When those things are discovered, they are disclosed, right? They are kind of shown, they are given back over to the appropriate authorities, and an investigation ensues, right? That's what you'd want to make sure. You make sure you have all the documents, and then that would be the end of story. The distinction here is not between that everybody does it. The distinction is that the Donald Trump people willfully and knowingly took documents when they were not supposed to, did not go through the protocols, then lied about having the documents, and they had to be forced from their nearly dead hands. Versus the normal functioning of government and what we're seeing here happen in the Biden administration. Right? Does that mean Biden good, Trump bad? No, it doesn't, right? That's not the point. The point is what are the protocols we're supposed to be following, right? And when someone exceeds them and abandons all norms and breaks all codes and breaks all policy and law versus someone else who goes, yes, I'm sure we're going to find that there were some improper protocols that were kind of being set, but those documents were returned and there's cooperating on the investigation to ensure that there's no other outstanding documents, right? And probably a tightening of the rules around that for going forward, right? I mean, that would be the way we're doing. But what this is going to lead to, of course, is going to be this enormous, like, circus of investigations, basically like the purpose of the investigation, let's be clear, it's not to get to the bottom of the Biden, what happened with the Biden documents and all the conspiracy theories around that. It will be to prove that the government, according to these, Republicans who will no doubt open some sort of investigation, the Republicans who will basically say, use it as a way to defend Donald Trump against the overreach of the Stasi government, right? Of basically saying that it was indeed a witch hunt going after Donald Trump, and this was the Democrats doing this. And this is going to follow us into 2024. Because we know it's not just going to be what happened with these documents, it's going to be everything. We're going to relitigate everything that the Democrats did or was said about the Donald Trump administration. We're going to relitigate the impeachments. We're gonna there's going to be open investigations of Hunter Biden. There's going to be you name it. And why is this? Well, because as we know, the Republicans have no agenda other than A, owning the libs, and B, hand more money over to the rich. That's it. That's their policies. Everything else is only designed to continue to feed red meat to the worst of their base, to the worst of the narratives that stirs up fear and hatred in order to keep those people engaged and give them a reason to still vote for people who are destroying their own lives, right? That's really what we're talking about. So, whatever. So now we're going to have to, I swear to God, I have had an incredibly difficult time watching anything that's on MSNBC right now. And let me tell you why. Like I was a pretty regular, let's say, listener or watcher of both Rachel Maddow show and Chris Hayes' All In, right? And in part, the way I've always looked at that is like, you want the kind of the official Democratic line, you're going to get it there. You want to know what are the media strategies of the Democratic consultant class. That's what you're going to see that discussed. And if you want to know what's going on and what they see, what the mainstream media sees, particular broadcast media and cable news, what they see as the main stories, right? That's where you can see that kind of discussed. But and I've talked about this in the show a little bit before. The most frustrating thing in the world for me is that you have the focus is solely on Donald Trump still, right? And let me be clear. I'm not trying to say that Donald Trump is irrelevant, right? Donald Trump is not irrelevant insofar as he is the de facto leader of the Republican Party and is influential in that stuff, right? But that only matters insofar as our sole focus is going to be on like horse race politics between two teams, right? And the internal machinations of this, right? Meanwhile, there's really substantial things happening in the world, right? So, it's been really frustrating. Emily says, yeah, Mehdi Hassan is the only one that she could stand watching right now. I agree. I mean, Mehdi Hassan is, at least that's kind of critical news, right? So whatever. I mean, I can't, I've turned it on a few times, say, okay, I need to listen to this, and I can't. So I'll listen to BBC News, right? Which is great because you finally get you get your head out of the American kind of media network that's focused on other things that are happening that are of significant consequence in the world, which is great. But for news that's happening around us, I'm just kind of reading newspapers. That's kind of really where it's at. And NPR, even like National Public Radio, NPR is also difficult for me, right? And in NPR, at least in NPR, you get a broader sampling of things that are going on. But the issue for me with NPR is NPR seems to still be stuck in this kind of journalistic mode of this both siderism kind of stuff, like, and has to pretend as if that some of the things that are coming out of people's mouths, right, in particular these right-wing Republicans, is somehow worthy of taking seriously or treating as kind of like in an equal way. And just, the critical questioning that takes place on NPR is, it's just pretty lackluster in my mind. Now you do have shows there that are much better, right? That do go into more information and stuff, but it's tough. So, anyways, I've been sticking primarily to print media. I'm reading it online primarily, but that's where I'm getting most of the stuff. But it's frustrating. So, I mean, I really actually I liked the fact. I remember the time before Trump, right? There was a brief window of time, or even at the beginning of Trump, maybe, where MSNBC, where both Rachel Maddow show and Chris Hayes' show, you at least got a kind of a range of issues that are covered. It wasn't all, Rachel Maddow, of course, she went in, as soon as she started going down everything's about Russia is the only story that we're going to cover. That was kind of led us down into say, okay, that's going to be their media strategy now. That MSNBC is basically going to say, okay, we're going to cover one thing and that's all we're going to do. To Chris Hayes' credit, to Time, what they do is on occasion that they cover some other stories when other things kind of break, which is good. But it kind of, it's always the kind of revert back to Trump, right? And if you want to cover the Trump story, that's fine. But it doesn't always need to be, the first 2/3 to 3/4 of your show, right? Put it at the end. So anyways, just as an illustration, a couple things happened. So I forgot to put this in the in my intro today, and I apologize for that. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight in today's show was the the New York nurses strike just came to conclusion with a big win for the nurses, right? I mean, these nurses have been on the front lines through COVID, right, and have been fighting for some really kind of basic things, like yes, some increase in pay, right? But no matter what you look at right now, the main concern of those nurses was basically having adequate coverage. I don't know why this is not showing up in my. That's weird. So for example, like these the nurses basically were saying is that in these kind of critical care facilities, they were being often asked to take care of 3 or more patients at a time, when the protocol is for it to be 1 or 2, right? I mean, because critical care is critical care, right? I mean, there's a lot that has to be done in order to make sure that those patients are not going to end up on the wrong side of life, if you know what I mean, not going to die. And they're being worked like the ragged, and and this is a result of kind of continued understaffing. Why is the understaffing there? Well, as kind of hospitals have been bought out by these gigantic holding companies who are designed solely to kind of squeeze profit out of anything that they lay their hands on. The number one thing to cut are our staff, and they see staff as nothing more than a cost, and that needs to be kind of eliminated if they're going to kind of increase profits. And so these California nurses went on strike. It was a 3-day strike, and it really becomes quickly apparent that without those nurses, the hospitals do not run, and crisis happens quickly. But at the same time, because nurses become nurses, right, and are doing a job primarily in part because they care about helping people. So it's not an easy choice, to say, okay, yes, these patients, they're not gonna get the care they need during this time. But if we don't stand up and do something about it, more patients are going to die and be harmed. So we're going to go on strike, and they did. Right, 2 major hospital chains in New York City, they went on strike. They came back. They won major concessions, agreements to hire more nurses, agreements to increase wages by about something along the lines of, I think, 19% over the course of the contract, right? Which is pretty. Yeah, here it is. It did show. I don't know why it's that. Let me read you here. So this is from the New York Times. Just I think it was this morning or yesterday after the strike continued. Was him. So more than 7,000 nurses at 2 New York City hospitals ended a 3-day strike, returned to work on Thursday. So it was just kind of yesterday. While they won, like I said, the concessions when it comes to wages, right? So most nurses on the picket line said that their main priority was improving working conditions by adding nurses to the short-staffed hospital floors, where they said crowded conditions had put patients at risk and led to stress and burnout among the staff. Right? That became the priority. Nurses, and I'm again quoting from the New York Times, nurses in the intensive care units at both hospitals said they had been routinely asked to care for 3 critically ill patients at a time, when they should only be attending to 1 or 2. Striking nurses also described how conditions at hospitals across the city had deteriorated as the coronavirus pandemic raged on. Many nurses left hospital jobs because of the trauma of the deadly first wave, burnout, or the promise of higher paying jobs as travel nurses. The nurses who remained were left with far more patients to care for, which they have said led them exhausted and frustrated. And so the strike exemplified a problem in hospitals across the nation where cost cutting by administrators, driven in part by low Medicaid reimbursement rates, had resulted in the staff stretched by well beyond recommended safe staffing ratios even before emergency conditions began. Okay, a couple things there. So one lays out kind of what I'm talking about. Here, listen to that paragraph, where cost cutting by administrators, driven in part by low Medicaid reimbursement rates. So the problem here is low reimbursement rates from government-funded Medicaid, right? That's the only thing they identify in here. Is like, so it puts these cost cutters, these administrators, and kind of like the victims of a force of nature, right? Caused by, in this case, the government. No mention of the privatization of hospital change. No mention of these private kind of holding companies coming in and squeezing them for profit for stakeholders, stockholders, right? For investors. No mention of that whatsoever. This was exactly the issues when there was a nurses' strike down outside Philadelphia, right? When you had the nurses who struck outside Philadelphia, it was the same issue. They were come in, that was bought out, right, taken over by this for-profit kind of holding company, and that's what they started doing, squeezing this. What COVID did is it just kind of ramped that up, right? And I guarantee you, inside these kind of like, these holding companies where, these people don't even know medicine. Inside those holding companies, what they do is they go in and say, oh, COVID, oh my God, COVID is all these nurses are leaving. They see this as an opportunity. Well, let's see how long we can stretch out the workers before we hire more. Because guess what? If we can cover the same amount of patients with fewer staff, we're going to actually make a hell of a lot more money. Right? So there you go. In California, this article also talks about in California how they basically mandated a nurse to patient ratio law. Right? They put this law. I can't remember. Let me see if I can find when it was put into law. This is 2004, right? They put that in basically to mandate this stuff. They put it at a statewide level. That should be happening in New York too as well. But so this is a huge story, right? And I'm not saying that it gets absolutely no coverage on like an MSNBC or something like this, because it kind of made some of that, and I think in part because it was in New York City, like, which is literally down the street from where these like NBC headquarters are located, and where the media center of the United States is, and all that stuff, that it gets some coverage. But I would argue, in terms of the coverage, the most meaningful stuff that is going to impact more people, a critical examination of something like this about why it is that we are breaking the backs of our nurses at a time when we need kind of like adequate medical care more than ever. Like, what are the causes of this? Let's look at it. Let's bring in some experts on what's been happening in the kind of hospital change and why this is devastating. Let's look at, for example, if there are low Medicaid reimbursement rates, right? Why is that? Right? Who are the lawmakers, specifically by name, who are the lawmakers who are standing in the way of better reimbursement rates? But those are not the questions, even like, this is why MSNBC is a problem, because they take all their cues for these Democratic operatives, right? And so the Democratic consultants know full well that a good chunk of their caucus within the Democratic Party were on board with these kind of metrics, right? For reimbursement rates. Because guess what? Dirty little secret is that under the Obama administration, a lot of those reimbursement rates went down. Because they utilized the same kind of like cost-cutting metrics that like the McKinsey uses, right? These consultant groups do. Because the primary interest, their lens was not patient care, quality patient care. Their lens is profit, balance sheets. That's the thing. And instead of looking at how do you expand and ensure that we're getting the adequate coverage, what do? They say, okay, we're taking our shrinking pot. We're not going to try to push back on that and try to raise more funds in order to kind of do. No. We're going to basically make the best with what we got. And we're going to cloak it in this kind of consultant class speak of what goes on. That deserves coverage. What else deserves that kind of coverage? Well, kind of what I was talking about here in terms of climate change, right? It should be the leading story in every single newscast that one of the primary reasons that we are facing climate disaster, right? Why at least 19 people have lost their lives in California. Millions and millions and millions of homes and communities like destroyed, damaged, lives uprooted, economy halted, all of that due by this fossil fuel fueled, right? Fossil fuel fueled atmospheric rivers that are kind of dumping all this rain on California. Now, this is again, just for all you people out there to be clear, did atmospheric rivers exist prior to like this current era? Yes, they're extraordinarily rare and not nearly as devastating. As we all know, as the climate warms, that allows more moisture to get into the atmosphere, that supercharges these kind of storms. So let's do a perp walk, shall we? How about that? We do that on the cable news. Let's do a perp walk of ExxonMobil and hold them accountable for those 19 deaths. For those what is most likely going to be billions of dollars in damages to these California communities. To the 7 people killed in Alabama by these crazy tornadoes ripping through the region. And full replacement of all their homes and their lost belongings. Roads rebuilt, not by our tax dollars, by ExxonMobil's profits. Let's recall that ExxonMobil and big oil in general is now getting record profits. When everybody was complaining about inflation and gas prices and all this kind of stuff, it wasn't because Exxon was hurting. It wasn't because, oh my gosh, that we're in crisis. No, it was because they wanted their profit margins to stay high, even as the cost of oil started to drop. And like it or not, folks, we got to get off of this. So let me read a little bit. This is from a report from the BBC. This is reporter Georgina Renard from the BBC. And just to kind of give you a little flavor of what's kind of was in these documents. So one of the world's largest oil companies, I'm reading now from the report, one of the world's largest oil companies accurately forecast how climate change would cause global temperatures to rise as long ago as the 1970s, researchers claim. ExxonMobil's private research predicted how burning fossil fuels would warm the planet, but the company publicly denied the link, they suggest. The academics analyzed data in the company's internal documents. ExxonMobil denied the allegations. Quote, "The issue has come up several times in recent years, and in each case, our answer is the same. Those who talk about how Exxon knew are wrong in their conclusions," unquote, the company told BBC. That's what Exxon just told them. Corporations, including ExxonMobil, have made billions from selling fossil fuels that release emissions that scientists, governments, and the UN say cause global warming. They do cause global warming. The findings suggest that ExxonMobil's predictions were often more accurate than even world-leading NASA scientists. So not only did Exxon know that its business model was going to destroy the planet, their models were even better than the ones NASA knew about. Quote, "It really underscores the stark hypocrisy of ExxonMobil's leadership, who knew that their own scientists were doing this very high quality modeling work and had access to that privileged information while telling the rest of us that climate models were bunk. Naomi Oreskes, professor of history of science at Harvard University, told the BBC News. The findings are, quote, a, quote, smoking gun, suggests co-author Jeffrey Suprin, associate professor of environmental science and policy at the University of Miami. Quote, our analysis allow us for the first time to actually put a number on what Exxon knew, which is that burning of their fossil fuel products was going to heat the planet by about 0.2 degrees Celsius of warming every decade, unquote, he said. Researchers have never before quantified the scientific evidence in ExxonMobil's documents, he says. In response, ExxonMobil pointed to a 2019 U.S. court ruling that concluded, quote, ExxonMobil executives and employers were uniformly committed to rigorously discharging their duties in the most comprehensive, meticulous manner possible. What does that tell you? It tells you that billions of dollars in lobbying works. Quote, their excellent climate modeling was at least comparable in performance to one of the most influential and well-regarded climate scientists of modern history, unquote, Professor Supran said, comparing ExxonMobil's work to NASA's James Hansen's, who sounded the alarm on climate in 1988. Professor Oreskes said the findings show that ExxonMobil, quote, knowingly misled, unquote, the public and governments. Quote, they had all this information at their disposal, but they said very, very different things in public. Unquote, she explained. Previous investigations have unearthed Exxon documents that suggest the company sought to spread doubt about the science. One internal paper set out the, quote, Exxon position to, quote, emphasize the uncertainty and scientific conclusions about the greenhouse effect. Now, what I'm telling you, if you're listening to this show, what I'm telling you is not going to be news, right? This has been the thing that so many of us have been shouting into the void about for so long, right? And we're seeing the dramatic consequences of this and the deaths being caused, right? The direct line between Exxon knowing in the 1970s to those 18 or 19 people dead in California. Lives uprooted, businesses destroyed, schools underwater, people displaced. And this is our story going forward. That is a story worthy of putting the best critical minds to. And, you know, I've heard even Chris Hayes talk about this on cable news about how, well, you know, look, frankly, as climate doesn't sell, right? I mean, we're a for-profit company and it doesn't sell and viewers aren't as interested in this kind of stuff, but they're interested in Trump stuff. That may be true, but guess what? If you have all those resources at your disposal and all your creators on staff, maybe your creators can get a little creative about how to make sure that these stories are compelling. Instead of the lazy, let's follow Trump reporting. Excuse me. Crazy. I mean, you think about this. In California,
this is
right?
Democracy Now!
In California, there's report. I guess it's not as the worst possibilities doesn't look like they're going to come to pass. It looks like the rain's going to die out a little bit in California, but officials in the Monterey Peninsula were basically issuing warnings that the peninsula could become an island as this one river that kind of leads through it was about to flood. That means that the peninsula would have been cut off from the mainland for who knows how long until the flooding subsided. I mean, this is what we need, right? We need attention on this kind of stuff. So anyways, I guess that's what we're looking forward to 2023. My prediction is going to be that most mainstream media is going to be obsessed with the Trump story and the investigation story, and there's going to be lots of hand-wringing and that kind of stuff that's going on. But it's going to be up to all of us to keep our noses to the grindstone, to pay attention to what really matters here. And again, I don't mean to suggest that what's happening with Trump is irrelevant, because of course it's relevant. I mean, we're watching the further kind of machinations toward, kind of fascism, right? So of course they matter. Let me see, where's this other piece? I want to, oh my gosh, am I going to have this not here too as well? Here's another story that I didn't mention in our intro today. This is just reported in The Guardian, right? So the advocacy arm of the Heritage Foundation, which is, kind of one of the kind of OGs in right-wing think tanks, the powerful conservative think tank based in Washington spent more than $5 million on lobbying in 2021 as it worked to block federal voting rights legislation and advance an ambitious plan to spread its far-right agenda calling for aggressive voter suppression in battleground states. Right? This is an excellent report. I will try to remember to put the link in today's show notes. This report that was published in The Guardian as part of their, what they call Documented. It's in partnership with Documented, an investigative watchdog and journalism project. So they basically looked through all the kind of tax filings from the Heritage Foundation and found out that the Heritage Foundations, among other conservative organizations, were spending like crazy to basically looking for ways to undermine the right to vote. Why? Because they know that they're increasingly a minority in the U.S. polity, right? So that in order to ensure minority rule, as far as we were going forward, then you need to basically suppress the vote of people that you don't like. So there you have it. That's more going forward. And all that's going to become super, super kind of important as we move through the year. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little about what's happening here in the local school boards because it is that season and the school boards are already off to a, pretty nasty start. Anyways, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. You can help support this show by heading on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can become a patron for as little as $5 a month. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this message.
Where are my people? Where are my people? Where are my people? Where are my people?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It's Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. It didn't take long for the rot in the Penridge School District to spread to Central Bucks School Board. I should say it's kind of like a mutually reinforcing rot that's happening in our school boards in Bucks County right now. That is going to continue. As you may have heard, I'm sure many of you have already heard, the Central Bucks School Board approved a policy on Tuesday that basically bans teachers from engaging in what it calls advocacy activities. Now, this includes things like, displaying pride flags in your classrooms or having a sticker that says this is a safe space for students who may be experiencing say bullying or, I don't know, racial harassment or misogyny or homophobia or other forms of abuse, right? I mean, that kind of thing. So that went ahead on Tuesday. Right. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. This is, of course, part of, remember that we had the kind of 2 years ago, we had the big push of all that right-wing money flooding school board races, particularly from Paul Martino, but also from people like Jeffrey Yass and from Andy Meehan had his people all out there kind of going organizing around this stuff. Everything for that right-wing push to get us to focus on the fictions of critical race theory, indoctrinating our kids and making white people hate each other or hate themselves, or the vaccine denialism, the anti-maskism, right? All the fake science that was kind of all that kind of stuff, right? Anything that they could use that basic, or let's not forget the grooming, right? Let's not forget the grooming, right? Anything to get like those kind of base voters, right? That kind of small but very vocal and active and angry group of right-wing Republicans to show up to school board elections and elect similarly thinking right-wing folks. That's how we got kind of QAnon adjacent people elected to the Penridge School District, to the Central Bucks School District, to the Palisades School Board down in Pennsbury, right? I mean, so we know what's going on, right? We know this has been going on, and now we're seeing the consequences of those elections full. So it's not just about kind of the ideological, craziness. Now we're seeing kind of policies fundamentally change what our schools are looking like, and it's happening at a very slow pace, right? That's the way it keeps it out of the kind of like our mainstream consciousness. At least reporters are following some of this stuff. But we had, for example, the book ban policies that passed in the Penrith School Board, even as like Joan Cullen in the school board. Oh my God, it is not. No, it is not. How dare you call it a book ban, right? How about the suppression of free speech of students and faculty members and teachers throughout the district? Oh no, it's not a ban. It's just neutrality, right? We can look at these policies and understand the language in these policies has been crafted, has been workshopped, and is being deployed now as political language to make it sound as if these policies are somehow kind of neutral. It's about protecting the kids, when really this is about a right-wing, really religious, white supremacist agenda that has made its way into local Republican parties, right, and activists, right? That's the whole idea. And this latest policy that was passed in the Central Bucks School Board, it's called Policy 321. It's basically says you are not allowed to have anything that says that you're anything less than a drone, right? And questions still remain. Well, okay, if I'm like a gay man and I'm married to another gay man, and my husband, right, gives me, like say a wedding ring, right, that's got the pride symbol in it. Am I now banned to wear that? If I speak about myself as a gay man, am I violating the new policy? Is this advocacy because it doesn't conform with your white Christian ways of being? I mean, this is really bad. I mean, Tabitha Delangelo, who is on the school board member, is a school board member at the Central Bucks School Board, right, who voted against this policy, right? She has been kind of like, super public and super forthcoming in her criticism of what's going on here in the school board. She's also a professor of education at the College of New Jersey. And I want to read that they interviewed her in WHYY, Emily Rizzo, which again, shout out to Emily Rizzo, who's doing phenomenal reporting on this. D'Angelo is again, a professor of education at the College of New Jersey. What she said is that inclusive spaces lead to better educational outcomes for marginalized students. Quote, stress impairs cognitive function. Creating classrooms where students know they are valued and included lowers stress and therefore improves cognitive function, unquote, Delangelo said. Quote, creating inclusive spaces in part means that students see themselves and one another reflected in positive ways in books, materials, and displays. I'm going to read a little bit more. Board President Dana Hunter, Vice President Lee Vlasblom, and members Deborah Cannon, Lisa Ciccio, and Sharon Kalalopi and Jim Pepper voted for the policy. Cannon said she wants teachers to act with neutrality in the classroom and not refuse to teach the curriculum that challenges their own political viewpoint. She said one teacher who she did not identify refused to name the former President Donald Trump, instead of referred to him as number 45. The policy specifically says that employees should not, quote, advocate to students on partisan, political, or social policy matters or display any flag, banner, poster, sign, sticker, pin, button, insignia, paraphernalia, photograph, or other similar materials that advocate concerning any partisan, political, or social policy issue. An early draft of the policy prohibited materials related to gender identity and sexual orientation, but school officials removed those terms after a legal review and replaced them with social policy issues, so they don't have to say the words, right? That keeps them out from the protected class violations. Oh, it's so crazy. Hunter told the Philadelphia Inquirer that the policy will ban pride flags as well as Blue Lives Matter flags, anti-abortion flags, or other flags that advocate on social policy issues, right? This is unbelievable to me. And the problem is, I'm reminded of some conversations I had with some students in the past when we were looking at, it was around these actually school board issues, right? It was like one of the things that we were looking at in our class. We're looking at a variety of different kind of angles and perspectives and things like this. And this one student, or it was actually a couple students, were trying to wrap their heads around the difference between the consequences of a policy and the actual words of a policy, right? And we've talked about this on the show before too as well, right? As you noticed, the school officials went through, took their policy through a legal review. And what the lawyers basically do in those legal reviews is they want to make sure, and I've seen, again, how many times we had to do this at Kutztown University, watch as the administration finds all the wiggle language it can use to kind of like not run, not get itself in legal trouble, right? So lawyers look at this stuff and they want to make sure that they remove any words that could potentially put them in, legal jeopardy. Right, so the reason why gender identity or sexual orientation, the reason why they wanted those words removed from their draft was because those are protected classes, right? They have constitutional protections, right? They have policy protections. So instead, they said, look, if you want to remove that, you got to take out those words, right? And then just use social policy issue, because the words are neutral. But the fact that gender identity and sexual orientation were explicitly mentioned in the previous draft tells you their intentions. Their intentions are to literally erase the acknowledgement of LGBTQ students. Right, and this is precisely what Emily Rizzo had another article in about Penridge, right? And if you want to see what's going to happen in the Central Bucks School Board or school district, here's look at what these Penridge students said. So here, this is what she said. This is the title: Penridge LGBTQ students feel erased after losing pride symbols in schools as Central Bucks considers its own ban. This is right before Central Bucks banned it. So I just want to read a little bit of this, just so we know what we're doing to our kids. I'm just going to read from Emily Rizzo's excellent reporting. Pride symbols and safe space stickers once decorated many classrooms and doors in Penridge High School. Now they're gone. Quote, "It's like being queer was erased from Penridge," unquote, says Silas Nathan, a transgender and pansexual junior at the school in Upper Bucks County, in a recent interview. At the start of the school year, the district adopted a new policy that prohibits staff from engaging in, quote, advocacy activities, unquote, on school grounds. It bans teachers from displaying materials and advocating to students about religion, sexual orientation, and gender identity, social, political, or geopolitical matters when not applicable to the curriculum. Quote, "Everything feels way less safe," Nathan said. "They're trying to hide us in a way. They don't want any LGBTQ representation anywhere." Now, the neighboring Central Bucks School District, the fourth largest school district in Pennsylvania, is considering a policy very similar to Penridge's, which, I will repeat, they just passed. The Central Bucks School Board is scheduled to vote Tuesday, which they did, on the final draft of their policy, which critics view as vague and discriminatory. This is how the policy is said. quote, because views and beliefs about partisan, political, or social policy matters are often deeply personal, employees should not, during assigned work hours, advocate to students concerning their views or beliefs on these matters, the policy states. In a statement to WHYY News, Central Bucks Superintendent Abe Lukabaugh said the policy is intended to, quote, reinforce an inclusive educational environment for all students. Lukabaugh said its teachers should be, quote, teaching all sides of an issue. So all sides of an issue. So do I teach, okay, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about why LGBT students have advocated for pride flags. And we're also going to talk about why LGBTQ students should be sent to hell for eternal damnation. Both sides of the issue. Here we go. Is that what we're talking about? Amy makes a great point. In our chat, she says, like, look, there goes MLK Day, right? Or Black History Month, or Women's History Month. Like, if you have a Women's History Month, you have to have a Men's History Month too? Well, but if you have Women's History Month and Men's History Month, do you need kind of like LGBTQ month too? Oh, we have that, right? Gay Pride Month, right? Oh, wait, we got to do that all at once? If we're going to teach about like the history of slavery, do we need to teach about the emancipation of the slaves and the real reasons why we should continue slavery? Should we have to teach like why, like against racism and pro white supremacy at the same time? If we're looking at questions about, say, police killings, do we have to look at the kind of the reasons why police are justified in shooting black people? At the same time, the black people are pointing to like we're kind of historically put in a bad position. Do we have to look at pro killing people versus anti-pro killing? I mean, what? Come on. This is the most, like, I swear to God, this is like pre-kindergarten version of what it means to teach in a democratic society. Make no bones about it. These policies are designed to prevent progress, to prevent the deepening of democracy in our society. They are meant to place a cold blanket over the kinds of discussions that are, yes, full of conflict, but are nonetheless necessary for a democratic society to become the multiracial, multi-ethnic, embracive kind of democracy that we, quote unquote, supposedly aspire to be. This is about a slow process of winding back the clock and instilling the permanence of white supremacist rule. Let's be clear. This is about enshrining white, conservative, right-wing Christian ideals as the only way to be in this society. We've talked about this on this show. We've had Jennifer Cohen on the show, Jenny Cohen on the show, talking about this kind of like dominionism, right? Needing to combat the 7 pillars, right? We need an education being one of them. This is that agenda in practice. This is what it looks like when we have ceded power to minority rule. And they are making good on what they said they would do. I mean, if there ever was a time that we need organizations like Planned Parenthood, like the ACLU, like the ADL, like these people that are actually kind of filing these lawsuits, attempting to defend what's left of our shrinking democratic society. I don't know what else is. I'm teaching a class. Garen McGarian was on the show not too long ago, right? And he and I were talking about that recent Supreme Court case. I'm spacing the name of it right now. We're talking about that recent Supreme Court case that was looking to basically, roll back civil rights and labor rights, right? So Moore versus Harper. That's right, Moore versus Harper, right? And what this was, I'm sorry, not labor rights. This is what happens when I try to scroll through things or read at the same time. This is one who's basically looking to take up that, bizarre, doctrine of the kind of the independent state legislature doctrine, which basically said, our votes, majority votes, are really simply kind of like a plebiscite. They're more like a consumer satisfaction survey, right? Which a state legislator can take into consideration if it wants when it appoints kind of electors for particular candidates, right? I mean, it's just this bizarre thing. Go back and listen to that if you need to know what I'm talking about. But this is the same principle, right? It's the same idea, is that once you see that you have a party that has become increasingly more radical to the right, as increasingly advocating for the kinds of policies that are out of step with the majority of Americans, if they want to maintain power and all they care about is maintaining power, then what they do is they shrink the electorate. Again, you go after voting rights. You use education as a propaganda mechanism to support right-wing religious white supremacist notions of the way that America should be. And let's be clear, this was the problem, and we've talked about this on the show before too. Well, this was the problem with the Democratic consultant class who told school board candidates, right, back in 2021 and back in 2019, they told school board candidates not to talk about, they told Democratic ones, told them not to talk about critical race theory, not to kind of engage over the masking stuff, right, because those are hot button issues. You just want to focus on kind of the reasonableness of this. And by the time they realized that the critical race theory had gained enough traction, it was too late to respond. We had Dina Lagerman on the show a couple times, but she talked about this explicitly. About even her attempt. She ran for school board in the Central Bucks, right? And she basically said, is like, look, I remember saying, we need to be engaged this. And they were like, no, no, no. We need to be advocating for the kind of democracy we want to have. We need practice in advocating not for neutrality in our current context. We need to be advocating for a particular vision of what democracy should be. The reason why you advocate for multicultural education, multi-ethnic education, diversity, equity, and inclusion is because that is the version of this society that we want. And you have to articulate the positive vision of the society and give people a choice. Do you want that future where people are included, not hated? Do you want a future where equity rules the world? Or do you want a future in which the strong survive, the rich get richer, and screw the rest of us? Where only the white Christians who pray to God, right, and had the guy at the top, the woman underneath, and the children at the bottom. That's the only way to structure society. Or do you understand that democracy must contend with the society in all of its nature? And that's the Karl Popper thing I've talked about before, is that the fascist, the one who wants to deny other positions as legitimate, needs to be stopped. And sometimes liberals and Democrats get into this this thought loop and they get caught up in it. Well, if I'm arguing that all positions should be that we need to have room for people who are diverse and people who are gay and people who are straight, and we have to respect other people's opinion, well, then maybe we have to allow the Nazi to speak. Maybe that, because that's what it all means, right? Maybe that the fascists have a place at the table too. No. because they are arguing for the ending of all other positions. That's the big difference. In democracy, as its baseline, respect means at the very base, you have to recognize the legitimacy of the other person to exist and that their point matters. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to recognize the risk. Now, what do the Republicans do? These right-wing Republicans, they're trying to legislate out the ability of those other people to exist, especially when it comes to LGBTQ issues. They are trying to legislate out of existence the ability of people of color to vote equally to white people. That is what you exclude in a democratic society. See, this is the thing, right? Is that if I'm a gay man, right, I'm not trying to make everyone else a gay man, right? My agenda is not everyone has to be a gay man. My agenda is I want to be able to be a gay man and live my life in full love with who I choose to love, raise a family if I choose to raise a family, have a job, be treated like other people are treated. That's my goal. If I'm black in this society, my agenda is not to make everybody has to be black. Right? I'm not saying that, oh, in order to have access to this society, you have to be black and love everything that is black. Even those categories don't make sense because there's not the one thing that is black, right? That's what's crazy about this. It's only the white supremacist, the Christian nationalists, this really small group of people who want to hold on to a singular version of society and impose that on everyone else. And that single version is a white one. It is a patriarchal one. It is one that valorizes and canonizes and idolizes and privileges the rich. And if you are not those things, you are not a deserving subject of democratic rule. That's what they're trying to get us back to. That's the loss that they feel. And what they constantly do is they project their own singular version onto the attentions of other people. Because they believe this is what they think, so therefore that person who believes something different is trying to do the same thing to them. When all these other people, the vast majority of people, just want to be able to live their freaking lives. And in an ideal situation, govern themselves with an equal shot of influencing the discussion, the direction of the society, collaboratively and collectively. Instead of having a small elite make all the decisions, that opens up to all of us. That's the struggle, always the struggle. And here we have it. Right here in Bucks County. Right here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, we are on the front lines of a cultural war to turn back the time, to turn back the clock on democratic advancement. And I really do think the challenge going forward is going to be about articulating the vision that we want and organizing for that and campaigning on that vision. This is why I think more than anything else, why the Bernie Sanders campaign caught fire. Why we saw in 2018 the election of the squad is because we saw people that argued for a vision of the future that we could get behind. The Democrats' biggest failure, well, one of their biggest failure was not to go to double down on something like the Green New Deal. Instead, they caved to fear and their own corporate commitments and walked away from it. The Green New Deal was probably the best articulation of a vision. Was it complete? No. Right? But that document, that resolution that passed, the non-binding resolution that passed, right, laid out a picture of where we can go. And one that didn't leave people behind. Look, we know, anybody who's been alive for a minute knows that when we go for the horizon, right, when we go for that kind of utopian vision, if you will. I hate to use that word because it's so, utopia is so bastardized in terms of how it's utilized. But go for that vision of a better world. Right? Generally what happens is we don't get all the way there, right, in one shot. And there will be contradictions and there will be problems, right? And there will be incompleteness, right? But if the striving is for that horizon, one that is not about exclusion and walls and hate, but about opening up and building a better world for everyone as we heal the world that we've damaged so incredibly. Look, we have a record now of what capitalism does, of what the kind of fossil capitalism that we have embraced for so long has done, and particularly the form that we have here in the US, right? It has led to people like Elon Musk and what he's done to Twitter, for example, just as a small example. It has led to Bill Gates and his foundation wreaking havoc throughout our public education system by turning everything into like a high stakes test. And it valorizes and supports our basest impulses because it gets people all giddy when we kind of like find the psychological ways to manipulate their notions to think that somebody's coming for what they have. I just rewatched this documentary called on propaganda, right? Focusing on Edward Bernays. It's like an hour-long thing. Was just reminding me of all that Edward Bernays did. And really, it was a 100-year project, right, to turn public relations into a science of manipulating the masses amount of people in order to kind of like follow the agenda of a privileged few. We're all in. So, but luckily, yes, we may be at the front lines of this in Bucks County, but the alternative is also here, right? The organizing is already here, right? People looking for ways in order to kind of like to push back, right? People already organizing for the next round of school board elections. People already organizing to kind of like find and create kind of alternative spaces that are not going to kind of basically tell these kids that they don't matter. Looking for ways to kind of like reconnect with our communities to make sure that we will not go quietly into the night, as the saying goes. So that's where we are at, folks. That's where we are at. I thought I'd share as a way of closing out today. So this is like, you know, whatever. I can't believe how timely all this stuff is. So if you remember I talked a little about this on the show, but last semester I taught a class called Activist Writing Media, which is focused on activists and writing and media, really the connection between kind of social movements and social movement media and how those things kind of play out. This semester I'm teaching a class called Rhetoric, Democracy, Advocacy. And this is something I'll talk a little bit about on our Patreon site. And just a reminder for everybody too as well. There's going to be some additional content that's going up on our Patreon page. Again, that's patreon.com/rcpress. That will be the kind of thing that some of that content will go up for patrons first, but then will be released to everybody else. So I don't want kind of a paywall to kind of run into things. But it's an alternative to trying to basically reconstruct our website, ragingchickenpress.org. Instead of trying to reconstruct that whole website as a for doing the kind of writing that we're just going to move it and put it on our Patreon site. That's kind of the idea. And so, kind of thought pieces and stuff. Again, that new show that I was talking about that coming out, Dungeons and Dragons and Dads, will be on there. But I'll also talk a little bit out in my process of teaching this class of Rhetoric, Democracy, Advocacy, talk a little about that. So I'll share with you today a little bit some of this. So, and I'll put these up on our Patreon page here. So one book that I'll be reading here, ooh, you can't really see it because of the green screen stuff, but is Ian Angus's Emergent Publics, an essay on social movements and democracy. It's a really, really great book for kind of, it's nicely and condensed for some of the issues you bring up. So when we're talking about democracy, what do we mean? And democracy not just as a formal system of kind of like structuring a government, but also when we're talking about democratic culture, democratic society, what's necessary for that to be facilitated within, say the public sphere as large. So that's kind of, I'll give us some foundation here. We're also going to have a section we're going to look at what what happens, what are the challenges now. So we're reading a couple books here. There's this little book by Patricia Roberts Miller called Demagoguery and Democracy, which looks at kind of some of the case studies and how, when we look at the relationship between demagoguery and deliberation and some of the challenges. We're looking at Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, again as a way of teasing some of this stuff out. I thought I had all my books right here, but I don't. One of the things that I'm excited we're going to be closing out the semester with is this great book by Anand Giridharadas. It's called The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for the Hearts and Minds of Democracy, which I really think this is the kind of thing that we should be doing with a book group or something. Because what this book really is, what it gets you thinking about is it gets you thinking about persuasion, right? And in some ways it's a hard book to sit with right now. It's not hard in terms of the language. The language is not hard at all. But I mean, in the face of a, say, Republican Party, which is hell-bent on power at all costs, right? The temptation, and I think it's a necessity at this point. Having to organize for power right now becomes critical. But what Giridharadas does, he interviews a bunch of folks in this book, and they talk about the importance of the hard work of social movement building and persuasion. And it really has brought back to me these really important questions. So, and part of it does it through interviews, right? So it's looking at, I'll just read you this one part. The Persuaders, Giridharadas takes us inside these movements and battles, are seeking out the dissenters who continue to champion persuasion as an act of polarization. We meet leaders of Black Lives Matter, trailblazer in the feminist resistance to Trumpism, white parents at a seminar on raising adopted children of color, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a team of door knockers with an uncanny formula for changing the mind on immigration, an ex-cult member turned QAnon deprogrammer, hovering off stage, Russian operatives clandestinely stoking Americans' fatalism about one another, right? So it gives you a sense of it. So it's kind of like, it really is kind of like talking through, right, through these interviews. You get to hear people actually involved in the movement, actually doing this kind of work, hearing how their, say, own minds have changed in terms of how they approach some of their activism, and what that means in terms of how we think about building a democratic culture. So I think that's really kind of valuable. We're reading some other stuff along the way too as well, that I think will kind of help us tease out those questions about what's important right now in terms of, say, democracy. So that's where we're at. So I'll hear some about that. So again, you can check out all that stuff, new stuff that'll be going up on our site at patreon.com/rcpress. That's also the place where you can become a supporter of this program and all the work that we're doing by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. You head on over there, patreon.com/rcpress. New content will be coming up there. You get to see our fun little new show, Dungeons and Dragons and Dads, as well as some kind of some additional writing. So that'll be kind of fun. Anyways, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you all for who've kind of tuned in to kind of join us live, and for your comments, your engagement. It's always kind of wonderful to know that I'm not sitting out here talking into the void as it feels like I am so often. So anyways, listen, I wish you a good weekend. Hopefully we get a break in this rainy weather that is plaguing us here, although I'm sure it is part of the new norm that is emerging. Nonetheless, we soldier on. So anyways, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. We look forward to hearing from you Monday. I should say before we go, Monday show, Out to Coop Live at 7 p.m. There's a couple possibilities of guests for Monday. I'm still kind of back and forth with folks, so I'll let you know about that as soon as possible. If not, we'll do another kind of community open show. I'll let you know about that as soon as I have some stuff nailed down. We might even have, well, I don't know. I was going to say we might even have our newest, our new tech up and running by then, but I doubt it. But we'll go. Anyways, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. We'll see y'all on the flip side, and wish you a great weekend, and hope that we can get this together, save our democracy, and do it together, and come out better on the other end, right? That's what I say. See ya!
Where are my people? Where are my people? I guess I'll fly.